In this video I'm gonna show you how I made these two free cardboard buildings for Dungeons & Dragons, Warhammer or any other tabletop game. All the materials used for this project can either be acquired for free or very cheaply. The only thing you really need is something to cut with, some cheap hobby glue, some cheap hobby paint and a brush. So without further ado, let's get right into it. I have two small cardboard boxes and a big piece of double corrugated cardboard. It doesn't need to be double corrugated cardboard, I just happen to have gotten it with some packaging. The tea box is made from really thin cardstock, similar to what you can get in cereal boxes, and I'm gonna use that to make the roof tiles. And some popsicle sticks or coffee stirrers. You can get these very cheaply or free. Lastly, something to texture the walls is also nice. I got some sand from my local playground, and before I got started I glued both of the boxes shut and weighed them down while the glue was drying. So I'm gonna start with assembling the shape of the roof. I'm not gonna bother measuring how long each side of the box is, I'm just gonna hold it up to the paper and I'm gonna do the measuring with that. That way you can't make any measuring mistakes and you just know it works. I glued these on using some cheap tacky glue and some super glue. The super glue is not required, I'm just using it to make it go a little bit faster. I just put a dot on each side and I put some of the tacky glue in the middle so I can keep working. But again, you don't need to do this. Now that I've put together the basic shape of the building, I'm gonna cut up the popsicle sticks and the coffee stirrers, make some support beams and doors and windows. I didn't really plan where I would put everything, but I just did what I think looked good. To make the door frame I used some coffee sticks, and to make the door itself I cut up those coffee stirrers lengthwise so they look like smaller planks. This allowed me to get a lot of variation even though I only had two different sizes of coffee stirrers. So this is what I have so far. I also try to use the beams to cover up as much exposed and or ugly areas as possible. To get some more interesting shapes on the building, I used varying sizes of coffee stirrers and popsicle sticks for the support beams. And I also used my hobby knife to carve out some pieces of them just to make it look a bit more like real wood. The only thing left to do now is add some windows, add some roof tiles and add some sand to the exposed walls to resemble some stucco. As you can see, while applying the sand I placed the house in a plastic container. This was so that I could reuse all the sand that fell off and it wouldn't end up all over my desk. So I just finished putting the tiles on both of the roofs and I noticed there was a small gap underneath one of the roofs of one of the houses. At first I thought the tiles would cover it up, but it turned out it was still visible from the side. So to cover those gaps up I used a small coffee stirrer on both sides and now it's a lot less visible. When that's dry I'll do a little weathering on the wood on the building to make it look a little less boring, and then I will start priming and painting. To prime the houses I'll be using a mixture of some cheap black hobby paint and some glue. The reason I mix glue with the paint is so that it becomes a lot harder. This is to give the buildings a little bit more protection. So I left the houses to dry overnight. As you can see, a lot of places could really use a second coat, especially on the roof, but also some cracks and crevices around the building, which I've just missed. But that's fine, I'll go over it again with another layer of grey paint. I'll do this for two reasons. For one, if I use grey paint I can see where I've painted the second coat and where I haven't. And two, grey is a lot lighter and I want to paint some of the parts of the building a very light color, so this will allow me to get a little bit better coverage. Now that the second coat of grey paint was dry, I started to paint the roofs of the houses. I painted one roof red and one roof blue. I mixed a little brown into the red paint to get a little bit of a warmer and darker color for the roof. I did the same with the blue by mixing in a little bit of a dark green color. The coverage on these paints wasn't great, so I applied a lot of thin layers on both of the roofs and just switched between them so they could dry. In the meantime I also painted the texture on the walls white, mixed with a little bit of brown so I'd get a nice off-white color. Now that both the roof tiles and the paint on the walls is dry, I'll apply a black wash to the roof tiles and I'll apply a brown wash to the white walls. You don't need to use any fancy washes, you can just make one yourself. I did the same and I'll leave a link in the description below to the tutorial I used to make these washes. I dry brushed the roofs to bring out all the individual tiles on the roof. I did the same for the walls, I just lightly dry brushed it with some pure white to bring out the texture a bit more. Once I was done with the roofs and walls, I started to paint all the wooden beams on the building. I just mixed two brown colors I had until I got a color which I liked, and I applied it to the beams. Because I used cheap hobby paints, once again the coverage wasn't great, so I had to apply 2 layers of brown paint on all the beams. Once this was dry, I mixed in some white with the same brown paint and I dry brushed all the beams. And this is the final result.